The darkness was not empty, it was heavy. It pressed against Izuku Midoriya's eyelids with the weight of deep water, thick and suffocating. There was no gentle transition between sleep and wakefulness, only a sudden, jarring shift from absolute void to a sharp, stabbing pain at the base of his skull. He gasped, his lungs pulling in air that tasted sharply of dust, stale floor wax, and the metallic tang of ozone. Izuku's eyes snapped open. For a moment, the world was a blur of harsh, white fluorescence. He blinked rapidly, his irises contracting against the sterile glare of overhead tube lights that hummed with a low, menacing electrical buzz. 60 Hz, his brain supplied automatically, analyzing the frequency of the sound before he even fully registered where he was. Standard alternating current. Industrial lighting. He pushed himself up, his palms pressing flat against the cold, hard surface. A desk. He was sitting at a wooden school desk, his cheek having been plastered against the polished laminate. He rubbed his face, feeling the faint indentation left by the wood on his skin. Where am I? The question echoed in his mind, immediately followed by a cascade of secondary inquiries. How did I get here? What was the last thing I remember? Hope's Peak Academy. The letter. Standing at the front gates. The sky was blue. There was a sudden wave of dizziness, a localized drop in atmospheric pressure. Perhaps a chemical agent? No, a chemical agent would leave a lingering olfactory residue or respiratory irritation. Hypoxia? A sedative administered via dermal patch? He shook his head, trying to clear the cognitive static. He needed data. Without data, his mind was an engine revving in neutral, burning fuel but going nowhere. Izuku stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. The sound was deafening in the absolute silence of the room. He began to systematically sweep his environment. It looked like a classroom, but a classroom that had been subjected to a brutal, utilitarian redesign. The walls were painted a dull, institutional green. The chalkboard at the front of the room was pristine, completely devoid of chalk dust, suggesting it had never been used or had been meticulously cleaned. Above the chalkboard, a circular analog clock ticked away, but the second hand was frozen at the 12. Time, it seemed, was irrelevant here, but the most alarming feature of the room was the windows. Izuku walked over to the nearest window on the left side of the room. He reached out to touch the glass, but his fingers met cold, unyielding iron. Massive steel plates had been bolted over the glass. He traced the hexagonal heads of the bolts, 3/4-inch carriage bolts. Industrial grade. Driven directly into the masonry of the reinforced concrete walls. The steel plates are approximately 2 inches thick, judging by the acoustic resonance when I tap them. He rapped his knuckles against the metal. A dull, heavy thud. No reverberation. Solid. Bulletproof. Blast-proof. This isn't just to keep people out. The internal fastening suggests it's to keep something, or someone, in. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He took a step back, his eyes darting around the room. In the upper corners, mounted on swivel brackets, were security cameras. Their red LED recording lights blinked in a slow, rhythmic sequence. They were tracking him. As he moved to the left, the lens whirred, adjusting its aperture and panning to follow his center of mass. Omnidirectional, high-definition infrared cameras with motion tracking capabilities. Someone is watching. A controlled environment. An observation deck? A prison? Panic, sharp and metallic, began to rise in his throat. Izuku closed his eyes and forced himself to inhale for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, and exhale for a count of 4. Control the variables you can, he told himself. Start with the immediate person. Check your inventory. He patted down his uniform, the standard, crisp black blazer and green tie of Hope's Peak Academy. His pockets yielded nothing. No phone. No wallet. No keys. They had stripped him of all communication devices and identification. But as his hand brushed against the inside pocket of his blazer, he felt a familiar, rectangular weight. His breath hitched. He reached in and pulled it out. It was a notebook. Standard composition size, with a mottled black and white cover. Across the front, written in his own frantic, scrawled handwriting, were the words, Hero Analysis for the Future Volume 14. A wave of profound relief washed over him. This was his anchor. His entire life, his entire way of processing the chaotic, overwhelming world around him, was contained within the pages of his notebooks. Ever since he was a child, diagnosed with an intellect that fired 1,000 times faster than his peers, he had needed a way to ground himself. While other children played with toys, Izuku dissected the structural integrity of the playground. He analyzed the behavioral patterns of his classmates. He charted the probability of weather changes based on atmospheric pressure. His talent was both a gift and a curse. He saw too much. He heard too much. Every micro-expression, every scuff on a shoe, every hesitation in a voice. It was all raw data pouring into his brain. The notebooks were his external hard drive. By writing it down, he could categorize it, understand it, and most importantly, stop it from echoing endlessly in his skull. It was what earned him the Scout from Hope's Peak Academy. He wasn't a hero. He had no physical prowess. He was the ultimate analyst. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the cover, desperate for the comfort of his own meticulously organized charts, psychological profiles, and situational breakdowns. He needed to read his previous notes. He needed to find a clue as to why he was here. He flipped the cover open. Nothing. He flipped to the next page. Nothing. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He thumbed through the pages, faster and faster, the paper making a harsh thwip 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 sound in the silent room. Page after page, spread after spread. White. Unblemished. Empty. Every single word, every drawing, every deduction he had spent the last year compiling had been erased. No, not erased. The paper was perfectly smooth, with no indentations from a pen pressing into it. This was a brand new notebook, meticulously constructed to look exactly like his old one, right down to the frayed edges of the binding and the specific brand of cover. They replaced it, his mind whispered, the deduction terrifying in its implications. They studied my belongings. They recognized the psychological importance of the notebook to my cognitive function. They removed my data, my history, my comfort, but provided a blank slate. Why? To test me? To force me to start over? They know how my mind works. He stared at the blank white pages. In that emptiness, he saw a threat. The blank pages were a void, a lack of information in a situation where ignorance meant death. Okay, Izuku whispered aloud, his voice sounding thin and raspy. Okay. No data? That just means I have to gather new data. He looked at the desk he had woken up at. There was a single, standard-issue ballpoint pen lying perfectly parallel to the edge of the desk. He picked it up. He clicked it. The mechanical sound was sharp. He pressed the nib to the first blank page of the notebook. Date unknown, time unknown, location unknown, suspected subterranean or heavily fortified structure. Objective, survive. Gather data. Escape. The moment the ink stained the paper, a small fraction of the crushing anxiety lifted. He was no longer a victim. He was an observer. He was the analyst. A sudden, sharp chime echoed through the room, startling him. It was a cheerful, electronic melody, like a doorbell from a vintage sitcom. It was followed by the static crackle of a PA system. Ahem. Ahem. Testing, testing. Is this thing on? The voice was bizarre. It was unnaturally deep, booming with a faux heroic bravado, but it was heavily synthesized, laced with a digitized, cartoonish squeak. It sounded like a beloved television mascot whose audio file had been corrupted. To all incoming students of Hope's Peak Academy, please make your way to the gymnasium for the entrance ceremony. I repeat, please make your way to the gymnasium. Do not dawdle. Dawdling is strictly prohibited. Ahahaha. The PA clicked off. Izuku's pen flew across the page. Voice analysis. Synthesized. Modulated to mask age, gender, and origin. Tone, jubilant but mocking. The phrasing dawdling is strictly prohibited suggests a rigid, authoritarian rule set and enforced by an unseen entity. The laugh forced. Theatrical. He slipped the notebook and pen into his blazer pockets. He walked to the classroom door. It was a heavy sliding door. He grabbed the handle and pulled. It slid open with a smooth, well-oiled glide. He stepped out into the hallway. The corridor was vast, bathed in a sickly, purplish hue from neon lights embedded in the ceiling. The walls were painted in dizzying, hypnotic patterns of black and white. More steel plates covered the windows here. Security cameras hung like bats from the ceiling junctions. At the end of the hall, a large set of double doors stood open, a bright, inviting light spilling out from within. A sign above it read, Gymnasium. Izuku began to walk. As he approached the gym, he heard voices. Murmurs of confusion, tones of anger, a few gasps of fear. Others. He wasn't alone. He paused just outside the gymnasium doors, taking a deep breath. Data collection begins now, he reminded himself. Look at everything. Assume nothing. He stepped through the doors. The gymnasium was massive, easily the size of a professional basketball court. The polished hardwood floor gleamed under the bright, stadium-style lighting. But the sporting equipment was gone. No hoops, no bleachers. Just an empty expanse, save for a large, crimson podium at the far end, and the 15 people standing in the center of the room. As Izuku entered, a few heads turned his way, but most were entirely absorbed in their own panic, or aggressive posturing. Izuku didn't move to join them immediately. He stayed near the periphery, his eyes darting across the group, his brain kicking into high gear. The world seemed to slow down. The chaotic noise of 15 arguing teenagers faded into a dull roar as his analytical protocols engaged. Target 1, Izuku thought, his eyes locking onto a boy with spiky, ash-blonde hair who was currently shouting at a tall boy with glasses. The blonde boy was practically vibrating with aggressive energy. His posture was wide, dominant, leaning forward on the balls of his feet, a fighter's stance, ready to spring. His hands were stuffed into his pockets, but Izuku could see the fabric straining against the tension in his forearms. Analysis, Katsuki Bikugo. We went to middle school together, though we haven't spoken in years. His acceptance to Hope's Peak was highly publicized. The ultimate pyrotechnician. Look at his hands. Even when he pulls them out to gesture angrily, the skin on his fingertips is thickened, callous from handling combustible materials and fuses. There's a faint, almost imperceptible discoloration on the cuffs of his white shirt, sulfur yellow. He smells faintly of phosphorus and burned sugar. His aggression is a defense mechanism. He's assessing threats by trying to provoke a reaction to gauge the strength of those around him. Izuku's eyes flicked to the tall boy Katsuki was yelling at. Target 2. The boy was rigidly upright, his spine perfectly straight. He wore the standard uniform, but it was impeccably ironed, not a single crease out of place. His hands moved in sharp, robotic chops as he spoke. Analysis, Tenya Ida. The ultimate moral compass. Comes from a long line of politicians and civil servants. His rigid posture indicates a strict adherence to rules and hierarchy. He is trying to establish order by acting as a pseudo-authority figure. He relies on established protocols. In a situation without rules, he will be the first to psychologically fracture because his internal framework requires external structure. Izuku pulled out his notebook, his hand moving in a blur as he jotted down shorthand symbols and abbreviations only he could decipher. Target 3. A girl with a round face and short, brown bobbed hair. She was looking around with wide, anxious eyes, hovering near the edge of the group. Analysis, Achiko Uraraka. The ultimate astronaut. Notice her stance. Her feet are positioned slightly wider than shoulder width, knees slightly bent. It's a stance designed to maintain equilibrium in shifting gravitational environments. Her spatial awareness is incredible. She subconsciously maintains exactly an arm's length distance from everyone around her. But look at her shoes. While her jacket is a high-tech, expensive-looking synthetic polymer designed for temperature regulation, her sneakers are worn down at the heels, the laces frayed. She comes from a lower-income background. Her drive to succeed is likely tied to financial security for her family. A strong motivator. A potential vulnerability. Target 4. A boy standing entirely apart from the rest, leaning against the gym wall. He had strikingly split hair, white on the right, crimson on the left. Analysis, Shoto Todoroki. The ultimate heir. Son of Enji Todoroki, CEO of Endeavor Corp., the largest private security and military contractor in Japan. Shoto's posture is completely relaxed, almost lethargic, but his eyes are constantly tracking the room. It's a cultivated indifference. Look at the asymmetry in his body language. His right side is slightly slouched, his right hand relaxed. His left side is rigid, his left hand clenched into a fist. He resents his left side, a deep-seated psychological trauma, likely related to his father. He wears a custom, expensive silk shirt, but it's partially untucked, the collar unbuttoned. He possesses immense wealth but rejects the aesthetic of it. Rebellious, but contained. Target 5. A girl with wild, pink dreadlocks and goggles resting on her forehead. She was on her hands and knees, literally inspecting the floorboards with a small magnifying glass she had pulled from a utility belt. Analysis: May Hatsum. The ultimate inventor. Grease stains on the left cheek, indicating she is left-handed and wipes her face while working. Her pupils are slightly dilated, and her eyes dart erratically. She processes visual information faster than normal. She isn't panicking about being trapped, she is analyzing the construction of the trap itself. Pragmatic to a fault, lacks standard social boundaries, prioritizing mechanical intrigue over human interaction, Izuku continued his sweep. He catalogued Momo Yayorozu, ultimate polymath, noting the sophisticated vocabulary she used to try and calm the others, contrasting with the nervous twisting of a high-end pearl ring on her finger. He analyzed Suyu Ajui, ultimate herpetologist, noting her unnervingly calm demeanor, and the way her eyes rarely blinked, observing the chaos like a predator watching insects. He spotted Minoru Mineta, ultimate botanist, trembling behind the taller students, his eyes darting toward the exits, pure, unfiltered cowardice and self-preservation. He saw Eijiro Kirishima, ultimate bodybuilder, trying to physically insert himself between Bakugo and Ida, acting as a meat shield mediator. Hitoshi Shinso, ultimate hypnotist, standing in the shadows, dark circles under his eyes, observing the power dynamics without participating. Denki Kaminari, ultimate electrician, tapping his foot in a rapid, erratic rhythm, masking deep anxiety with a forced, goofy smile. Kyokujiro, ultimate musician, earphone jacks plugged into her phone, though the screen was dead, using the physical act of listening to music as a psychological barrier. Yuga Oyama, ultimate sommelier, posing dramatically, but Izuku noticed the cold sweat on his brow and the subtle shaking of his knees, a facade of confidence masking deep insecurity. Fumikage Tokoemi, ultimate occultist, arms crossed, cloaked in darkness, a theatrical embrace of the grim situation. Hey! You! The mumbling kid! Izuku snapped out of his trance. The entire gym had gone quiet, and all 15 pairs of eyes were now fixed on him. He realized with a flush of embarrassment that he had been muttering his analyses aloud under his breath, a rapid-fire stream of deductions. It was Katsuki who had called him out. The blonde boy was stomping toward him, a scowl etched deep into his features. I know you. Midoriya. The creepy stalker kid from Aldera Junior High. What the hell are you doing lurking in the corner whispering to yourself like a psycho? Izuku swallowed hard, clutching his notebook to his chest. I was just taking inventory, Kaken. Don't call me that. Katsuki snapped, grabbing Izuku by the collar of his blazer. Where the hell are we? You're supposed to be some kind of genius, right? The ultimate analyst? So analyze this. Why are there metal plates on the windows? Where are the teachers? Unhand him immediately. Ida marched over, his hand chopping through the air. Physical violence is strictly prohibited under school regulations. We are the elite students of Hope's Peak. We must act with dignity. Shut it, glasses. Katsuki snarled, though he let go of Izuku, shoving him back slightly. There are no rules right now. Look around. We've been kidnapped. Kidnapped? Uraraka squeaked, her hands flying to her mouth. But we just walked through the front gates. How could someone kidnap 16 people from the middle of Tokyo in broad daylight? That is the question, isn't it? Todoroki's cool voice drifted over from the wall. He finally pushed himself off and walked toward the center of the group. Given the structural modifications to the building, this was prepared well in advance. This isn't a random hostage situation. This is a controlled facility. Fascinating. Hatsum popped up from the floor, wiping a smear of dirt off her nose. The bolts on the windows are reverse-threaded titanium. You'd need an industrial hydro-spanner just to loosen them. Whoever built this place spared absolutely no expense. This is no time to admire the craftsmanship, Momo said, her voice trembling slightly despite her composed posture. We need to find an exit. There has to be a fire escape or a service elevator. I've already checked, Shinso said lazily, stepping out from the shadows. Every door leading out of this wing is locked tight. Electronic keypads. And unless the ultimate electrician over there can hack a military-grade cipher, he nodded toward Kaminari, we aren't getting through. Kaminari held up his hands defensively. Hey, I build circuits and wire grids. I'm an electrician, not a hacker. The panic, which had briefly been subdued by Katsuki's aggression, began to swell again. Voices overlapped. Mineta began to hyperventilate. Izuku stood in the center of it, his mind racing. They're looking at the symptoms, not the cause. The room, the locks, the metal plates, those are just the physical parameters. The real question is the psychological motive of the captor. Why gather 16 ultimate students? Why leave us in an open space to interact? The PA announcement. It wasn't just to gather us. It was to set a stage. Wait, Izuku said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise because of the absolute certainty in his tone. Everyone stopped and looked at him. Izuku pointed toward the crimson podium at the front of the gymnasium. The announcement said to gather for the entrance ceremony. If this is a ceremony. Before he could finish his sentence, the lights in the gymnasium suddenly dimmed, plunging them into a heavy dusk. A single, blinding spotlight snapped on, illuminating the podium. The air grew cold. A strange, mechanical whirring sound echoed from the front of the room. From behind the podium, something began to rise. At first, it looked like a plush toy. But as it ascended into the spotlight, the sheer wrongness of it made Izuku's stomach drop. It was a bear, roughly 3 feet tall, but it was split perfectly down the middle. The right half was pristine, fluffy white, with a wide, reassuring smile and a dot for an eye. It looked like a caricature of the legendary hero, All Might, complete with 2 tufts of hair standing up like the hero's signature bangs. But the left half was a nightmare. It was pitch black. The eye was a jagged, glowing red lightning bolt. The smile was a wicked, serrated grin, revealing rows of sharp, metallic teeth. A muscular, robotic arm ending in vicious claws hung by its side. It was a grotesque amalgamation of heroic imagery and demonic machinery. The bear cleared its throat. The same synthesized, booming yet squeaky voice from the PA system echoed through the gym. I am here! The bear shouted, mimicking the famous catchphrase, before immediately breaking into a high-pitched, mocking giggle. Pupa! I am here, to be your headmaster. Silence descended on the gym. It was a thick, suffocating silence, born of absolute bewilderment. What is that thing? Uraraka whispered, instinctively taking a step backward. Is it a remote-controlled drone? Hatsum leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with dangerous curiosity. The articulation in the jaw joints is incredible. Is it powered by microhydraulics? I am not a drone. The bear snapped, waving its mechanical claw angrily. I am your headmaster. The one, the only, Monomite. Show some respect, you ungrateful zygotes, Katsuki sneered, sparks literally flying from his teeth as he ground them together. A talking stuffed animal? Is this a joke? Whoever is playing this sick prank over the PA system, come out here and fight me. I'll blow your damn face off. No prank, hothead. Monomite laughed, hopping up onto the podium. It moved with a disturbing fluidity, too smooth, too biological for a machine. I am the real deal, and I have gathered all of you, the finest, most talented, most utterly nauseatingly hopeful students in the country, to this lovely, fortified little school for a very special curriculum. Izuku's pen was flying. Monomite. Designation, headmaster. Movement, uncanny valley, high-end robotics, or possibly organic components. Attitude, sadistic, manipulative. He is mocking the concept of heroes. He is intentionally trying to provoke a reaction. A special curriculum? Ida asked, stepping forward, pushing his glasses up his nose. As the representative of the student body, I demand to know the meaning of this. This is a clear violation of educational law and human rights. We demand to be released to our families immediately. Families? Monomite tilted his head, the red eye glowing brighter. Oh, you won't be seeing them for a long, long time. In fact, you might never see them again. A collective gasp rippled through the students. Let me be perfectly clear, Monomite announced, spreading his arms wide. You 16 students are now the permanent residents of Hope's Peak Academy. You will live here. You will sleep here. You will eat here. For the rest of your natural lives. The doors are locked. The windows are sealed. You are cut off from the outside world entirely. This is your new reality. Pupa, bullshit. Katsuki roared. I'm not spending the rest of my life trapped in a high school with these losers. If the doors are locked, I'll just blast my way through the walls. Ah! Monomite wagged a finger. Destruction of school property is a severe violation of the rules. And rule breakers will be subject to extreme disciplinary action. But, the bear paused dramatically. Because I am a generous headmaster, there is a loophole. There is one way to graduate. One way to get the doors to open and return to the outside world. Izuku stopped writing. His breath caught in his throat. He looked at the serrated grin on the black side of Monomite's face, and a terrifying realization washed over him. He wants us to turn on each other, the ultimate psychological pressure cooker. He's removing our hope of rescue and offering a single, poisoned alternative. What is it? Momo asked, her voice tight with dread. What is the condition for graduation? Monomite's grin seemed to widen. It's simple, really. If you want to leave, all you have to do is kill one of your classmates. The word hung in the air. Kill. It was a heavy, ugly word that didn't belong in a high school gymnasium. It didn't belong among a group of teenagers who had dedicated their lives to becoming the best in their fields. Kill? Asri repeated, her head tilting slightly. Ribbit. That's a very bad joke. No joke, Froggy. Monomite laughed. Bludgeoning, stabbing, strangling, poisoning, blowing up, crushing, electrocuting. I don't care how you do it. But if you want to graduate, you must commit murder. And not just that, you must get away with it. Monomite pulled out a small, electronic tablet and tossed it onto the floor. It skittered across the hardwood and stopped at Ida's feet. I call it the killing game. Monomite cheered. When a murder occurs, a class trial will be held. You will all debate and vote on who you think the killer, the blackened, is. If you guess right, only the killer is punished, and the rest of you continue living your miserable lives here. But, if you guess wrong, the killer graduates and goes free, and everyone else will be executed. Executed. Izuku felt the blood drain from his face. His knees felt weak. He looked at his notebook. The blank pages seemed to mock him now. How could he analyze this? This wasn't a puzzle. This was madness. You're insane, Todoroki said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. We are the top students in the nation. We aren't going to murder each other just because a psychotic teddy bear tells us to. Yeah. Kirishima slammed his fists together. That's super unmanly. We're not killers. We're gonna stick together and find a way out of here. That's the spirit. Monomite cheered sarcastically. Denial. It's the first stage of grief. But let's see how long that camaraderie lasts when the paranoia sets in. When you realize that the person sleeping in the room next to you might decide their freedom is worth more than your life. I've heard enough of this crap, Katsuki exploded. He didn't just yell, he moved. With terrifying speed, the ultimate pyrotechnician launched himself at the podium. He leaped into the air, his hands rearing back. Izuku could see the sweat on Katsuki's palms, knowing what was coming next. Katsuki had coated his hands in a custom, volatile chemical compound he had developed himself. When he slammed his palms together, the friction and pressure would ignite a massive blast. Die, you stuffed piece of trash! Katsuki roared. He slammed his hands down on Monomite's head. Kaken, no! Wait! Izuku screamed, his analytical mind recognizing the trap a fraction of a second too late. Rule destruction of school property / assaulting the headmaster. Result: extreme disciplinary action. Before Katsuki's hands could make contact, there was a deafening clack 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 sound from the ceiling above the podium. Izuku's eyes tracked the sound. 3 panels in the ceiling had slid open. Dropping down from the darkness were 3 multi-barreled Gatling guns. Danger! Izuku shrieked. Get down! He didn't think. He acted. Izuku lunged forward, tackling Katsuki around the waist while the blonde was still midair. The two of them crashed to the hardwood floor just as a hail of rubber bullets, fired at velocities high enough to crack concrete, shredded the space where Katsuki's head had been a millisecond before. The roar of the gunfire was deafening in the enclosed gym. Students screamed, diving for the floor, covering their heads. The air filled with the smell of cordite and pulverized wood as the bullets chewed through the gymnasium floor. It lasted only 3 seconds. Then, the guns retracted, the ceiling panels sliding shut. Silence returned, save for the whimpering of a few terrified students and the ringing in their ears. Izuku lay on top of Katsuki, his heart pounding so hard he thought his ribs might shatter. He looked up. Monomite was still standing on the podium, completely unharmed. The bear clicked its tongue. My. That was close. Consider that a warning shot. Assaulting the headmaster is strictly against the rules. Next time, it won't be rubber bullets. It will be live, armor-piercing rounds. Do we understand each other? Katsuki pushed Izuku off him, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. He looked at the splintered, destroyed hardwood floor where he had been about to land. For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo looked truly terrified. Now then! Monomite clapped his paws together. Before I was so rudely interrupted. I have provided each of you with an e-handbook. It contains the school rules, a map of the accessible areas, and your digital dorm room keys. Pick them up, read the rules carefully, and enjoy your new, despair-filled school life. I'll be watching, with a final, sickening apupupa. The podium rapidly descended back into the floor. The spotlight clicked off, and the normal gymnasium lights flickered back on. The mascot was gone. The 16 students were left alone in the massive room. No one moved. No one spoke. The reality of their situation was settling over them like a thick, suffocating blanket. They were trapped. They were at the mercy of a psychotic machine. And the only way out was murder. Mineta was the first to break. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, and began to sob hysterically. We're going to die. We're all going to die in here. I don't want to die. Shut up! Jiro yelled, her voice cracking. She hugged her arms around herself, her earphones trembling. Just shut up. We need to think. Think about what? Kaminari panicked, pacing back and forth. He said he has guns in the ceiling. He can kill us whenever he wants. We must maintain order. Ida shouted, though his voice lacked its previous authority. He was sweating profusely, his hands trembling. We must elect a leader. We must form a committee. A committee won't stop a bullet, Four Eyes, Shinso muttered, backing further away from the group. If what that bear said is true, the biggest threat in this room isn't the bear. It's us. The air in the room shifted. Izuku felt it immediately. It was a tangible drop in temperature. 16 teenagers. Strangers, mostly. Put in a life-or-death situation. Izuku watched as Uraraka subconsciously took a step away from Ida. He watched Todoroki shift his weight, placing himself with his back to the wall, ensuring no one could get behind him. He watched Momo pull her jacket tighter around herself, eyeing Katsuki with deep suspicion. Paranoia, Izuku thought. The poison has already been injected. The incubation period has begun. Stop, Izuku said. It wasn't a shout. It was spoken at a normal volume, but there was a strange resonance to his voice. It was the voice he used when he was reading a complicated string of data aloud. Cold. Clinical. Utterly rational. They all looked at him again. The green-haired boy standing in the middle of the ruined floor, holding a cheap notebook. Izuku took a deep breath. The panic was still there, buzzing in his chest, but he forced it down. He built a wall around it. He was the ultimate analyst. If he let emotion cloud his judgment, he would die. Worse, they would all die. Look at yourselves, Izuku said, sweeping his gaze across the room. Look at what you're doing. You're creating distance. You're assessing each other as threats. You are doing exactly what the mastermind wants. Mastermind? Todoroki asked, narrowing his eyes. Monomite is a machine, Izuku stated, tapping his pen against his notebook. Highly advanced, yes, but it is a puppet. The voice modulation, the dramatic timing, the specific targeting of our psychological weaknesses. There is a human intelligence behind it. The mastermind. And the mastermind's primary weapon isn't the Gatling guns. It's the game itself. Izuku opened his notebook to the first page. Let's look at the facts. The variables. We are 16 students. We have been chosen specifically for our talents. The facility is heavily fortified. The rules require murder to escape. Why? Because the guy is a psycho. Katsuki snapped, though he didn't move toward Izuku this time. No, Izuku countered immediately. Psychopaths are chaotic. This is methodical. This is an experiment. The mastermind wants to prove a hypothesis. They want to prove that hope, talent, and morality are fragile. They want to break us to prove a point. Izuku stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the center of the group. If we panic, if we turn on each other, we validate their hypothesis. We become the rats in their maze, pressing the lever for a poison treat. The only way to win a rigged game is to refuse to play by its rules. And how do we do that, Midoriya? Momo asked, her eyes searching his face for any sign of a plan. We establish our own rules, Izuku said, holding up his notebook. We operate on absolute transparency. No secrets. No sneaking around. We buddy up. We never go anywhere alone. If a murder cannot be committed in secret, a murder cannot be committed at all. We take away the opportunity, and we neutralize the threat. That's incredibly logical, Ida said, blinking in surprise. The rigid tension in his shoulders seemed to loosen slightly. It's just data, Izuku said, his eyes hardening. The mastermind thinks they know how we will react. They have a profile on all of us. But they made a mistake. Izuku looked down at the blank pages of his notebook. A few minutes ago, they had terrified him. They had represented a void, a loss of control. But now, as he looked at the 15 faces around him, faces filled with fear, anger, and desperation, he realized what the blank pages truly meant. The mastermind had wiped his past data, but in doing so, they had given him a new purpose. They had locked the ultimate analyst in a confined space with 15 subjects and an intricate, deadly puzzle. They gave me a blank canvas, Izuku muttered to himself, a small, fierce smile touching the corner of his lips. What was that, Midoriya? Uraraka asked softly, stepping a little closer to him. Izuku looked up. His green eyes were no longer wide with panic. They were sharp, focused, calculating. They were the eyes of someone who had just found the loose thread in a highly complex tapestry, and was preparing to pull it until the whole thing unraveled. The mastermind designed this game to be a tragedy, Izuku said, his voice ringing clear through the gymnasium. But they forgot to account for the most important variable in any closed system. Which is? Todoroki asked. Izuku held up his pen, clicking it once. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet room. Me. I'm going to figure out who is behind this. I'm going to analyze every inch of this school, every rule they've made, every flaw in their system. I am going to tear their game apart from the inside out. Izuku looked around the circle, making eye contact with everyone. No one is going to kill anyone. And no one is going to die. That is my absolute deduction. For a moment, nobody spoke. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere of despair that Monomite had left behind was pierced, just slightly, by the razor-sharp logic of Izuku's resolve. Katsuki scoffed, stuffing his hands in his pockets, but he didn't argue. Uraraka smiled, a genuine, relieved expression. Even Shinso looked mildly impressed. Izuku opened his notebook to the second page. Experiment, the killing game. Status, active. Primary objective, deconstruct the mastermind's methodology. Prevent all casualties. Escape. Method, ultimate analysis. The game had begun. The board was set. And Izuku Midoriya, armed with nothing but a ballpoint pen and a terrifyingly brilliant mind, was ready to play. The first 24 hours in Hope's Peak Academy felt less like a day and more like a single, elongated breath held in a vacuum. After Monomite's terrifying introductory ceremony, the 16 students had dispersed into the dormitory wing, guided by the electronic maps on their newly acquired e-handbooks. The devices were heavy, encased in military-grade polymer, and completely locked down. There was no internet browser, no messaging app, and no cellular signal. They contained only a map, a list of the school regulations, and a digital key tied to each student's biometric data. Izuku Midoriya had spent the entirety of that first night awake. His dorm room was a sterile, utilitarian cube. A single bed with crisp, white sheets. A desk. A small, attached bathroom. And bolted to the wall above the desk, a security camera with its unblinking red LED eye. It tracked him as he paced. He hadn't stopped pacing for hours. His new, pristine notebook was already a quarter of the way full. He had transcribed the school regulations word for word, analyzing the syntax of every rule to find loopholes. Rule 1. Students may reside only within the confines of the school. Leaving campus is an unacceptable use of time. Rule 2. Nighttime is from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Some areas are strictly off-limits during the night. Please exercise caution. Rule 3. Sleeping anywhere other than the dormitory will be seen as the intentional evasion of dorm rules and punished accordingly. Rule 4. With minimal restrictions, you are free to explore Hope's Peak Academy at your discretion. Rule 5. Violence against Headmaster Monomite is strictly prohibited, as is destruction of surveillance cameras. Rule 6. Anyone who kills a fellow student and becomes blackened will graduate, unless they are discovered. Izuku stared at the ink on the page until the letters blurred. Rule 6. The Killing Game Clause. It was the only rule that mattered, the axis around which this entire twisted microcosm revolved. It's a prisoner's dilemma, Izuku muttered into the silence of his room, the sound of his own voice jarring against the hum of the air conditioning. 16 actors. If we all cooperate, we all live, but we remain trapped. If one defects and kills, they potentially win freedom, while the rest die. The mastermind is betting on the selfishness of human nature overriding collective survival. He closed the notebook and rubbed his burning eyes. The logical countermeasure he had proposed in the gym, the buddy system, absolute transparency, was sound in theory. But theory rarely survived the friction of human emotion. He needed to solidify alliances. He needed to establish a baseline of normalcy, or the psychological pressure would cause the group to fracture before Monomite even lifted a finger. The morning announcement chimed exactly at 7 a.m. Bing bong, bing bong. The monitors in the room flared to life, displaying Monomite sitting in an oversized leather chair, sipping from a teacup. Good morning, everyone. It is now 7 a.m. Time to wake up and face another beautiful day of communal living. Let's give it our all today. Izuku washed his face in the bathroom sink, staring at his reflection. He looked pale, the dusting of freckles standing out sharply against his skin. There were dark circles blooming under his eyes. He slapped his cheeks twice, hard, and stepped out into the hallway. The cafeteria was located on the first floor. When Izuku arrived, a few others were already there. Momo Yaoyorozu was meticulously wiping down one of the long tables. Tenya Ida was inspecting the massive industrial kitchen, while Ochiko Uraraka sat at a table, staring blankly at a bowl of cereal. Midoriya! Ida called out, his rigid posture returning as he chopped a hand through the air. I am pleased to report that the pantry is fully stocked, non-perishables, fresh produce, and a refrigeration unit full of high-quality meats. It appears starvation is not part of the headmaster's curriculum. Of course it isn't, Izuku said, taking a seat next to Uraraka. Starving people are desperate, and desperate people make sloppy mistakes. The mastermind wants premeditated murder. They want us healthy, energetic, and terrified. Uraraka shuddered, dropping her spoon into her bowl. Deku, I mean Midoriya, do you really think someone here could do it? Could actually. No, Izuku said firmly. He looked her in the eye. If we stick to the rules we agreed on. No one goes anywhere alone. We sleep in our dorms with the doors locked. We eat together. We make it mathematically impossible to commit a crime in secret. Over the next half hour, the rest of the students filed in. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. Conversations were hushed. Every time someone reached for a butter knife or a heavy glass, someone else flinched. Then, Katsuki Bakugo walked in. He didn't go to the buffet line. He marched directly to the center of the cafeteria, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his crimson eyes sweeping over the group with absolute contempt. Behind him, looking incredibly uncomfortable, trailed Eijiro Kurishima and Denki Kaminari. "Listen up, extras," Bakugo barked, his voice echoing off the tile walls. "I've been thinking about this little buddy system the nerd proposed yesterday. And I've decided it's a load of crap." Izuku stood up immediately. "Kaken, wait. You have to look at the statistics." "Shut up, Deku!" Bakugo snapped, taking a threatening step forward. "Your statistics rely on everyone in this room being a good person. But one of us could be a traitor. One of us could be working for that stuffed freak. If I buddy up with a killer, I'm just handing them my back. That's exactly why we stay in large groups." Ida protested, marching over. "There is safety in numbers. There's safety in strength," Bakugo growled, slamming a fist onto the nearest table, making the silverware rattle. "I don't trust any of you. I don't trust your fake smiles, and I sure as hell don't trust Deku's creepy little notebooks. From now on, I do what I want, when I want. If anyone tries to follow me, I'll blow them through a wall." He turned on his heel. "Come on, shitty hair, dunce face. We're eating in my room," Kirishima grimaced, looking apologetically at the rest of the group. "Sorry, guys. He's just stressed. I'll keep an eye on him." Man code. Kaminari just offered a weak wave before scurrying after them. Izuku watched them leave, his stomach twisting into a tight knot. Fracture point 1, he noted mentally. Bakugo's paranoia has overridden his logic. By isolating himself with a small, submissive faction, he makes himself both a prime suspect and a prime target. "Well, that's just perfect," Kyokujiro muttered, twirling an earphone jack around her finger. "The guy with explosives for hands is off the leash. Do not let his abrasive demeanor infect our resolve," Ida commanded, though his voice wavered. "We must remain united." But the damage was done. The seed of doubt Bakugo planted began to sprout instantly. Tsuyu Ajiri eyed Momo's quiet wealth with suspicion. Minoru Mineta nervously backed away from Hitoshi Shinso, clearly unnerved by the hypnotist's silent, evaluating stares. They made it through the rest of the day in a tense, fragile peace. Izuku spent his time mapping the school, finding the locked steel gates that blocked off the upper floors, the sealed windows, and the extensive, disturbing amount of security cameras. Everything changed on the morning of day 2. At exactly 10 a.m., the monitors crackled to life. Ahem. "Will all students please report to the A/V room on the first floor? I repeat, all students to the A/V room. It's time for a special presentation. Attendance is mandatory." Apupupa. Izuku's blood ran cold. A variable shift. The mastermind is introducing a catalyst. When the 15 students gathered in the A/V room, Bakugo and his lackeys arriving last, standing stubbornly in the back, they found the room arranged like a small cinema. There were 16 plush chairs, and resting on the seat of each chair was a tablet with a pair of headphones. Each tablet had a name written on a sticky note. Monomite popped up from behind a sound mixing board. Welcome, cinephiles. I noticed that things were getting a little stagnant around here. You're all just playing house. It's boring. It lacks drama. What is this?" Shoto Todoroki demanded, refusing to touch the tablet with his name on it. "This, my dual-toned friend, is a little cinematic masterpiece I like to call a motive." Monomite cheered. "You see, I realize that none of you want to kill each other. You need a push, a reason to want to leave this school so badly that you'd do anything to graduate. So, I've prepared a personalized viewing experience for each and every one of you." "A motive," Izuku whispered. He looked down at the tablet bearing the name Izuku Midoriya. "Put on the headphones. Press play. And let the despair wash over you." Monomite giggled before sinking into the floor. Hesitantly, trembling, the students sat down. Izuku's analytical mind screamed at him not to look. "It's psychological warfare. Whatever is on that screen is designed to bypass your logic centers and target your emotional core. Do not engage. But human curiosity, fueled by a deep, primal fear, was too strong. If it involved his life outside, he had to know. Izuku sat down, placed the heavy, noise-canceling headphones over his ears, and tapped the screen. The video began with static. Then, a cheerful, upbeat pop song began to play, contrasting violently with the imagery on the screen. It was a montage of his life. But it wasn't his achievements. It was a montage of his mother, Inko Midoriya. It showed her cooking his favorite katsudon. It showed her smiling, buying him his first hero notebook. It showed her tearful, worried face when he had been diagnosed as quirkless. What is this? Izuku thought, his breath coming faster. Archival footage? Hidden cameras in our apartment? Then, the music abruptly cut to a low, droning hum. The scene changed. It was live footage. A timestamp in the corner confirmed it was today. It was his apartment living room. But the furniture was smashed. The TV was shattered. And sitting in the center of the room, tied to a chair, was his mother. She was gagged, her eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror, tears streaming down her face. Standing behind her were two figures in dark clothing, their faces obscured by grotesque, smiling masks. One of them was holding a crowbar. Words flashed across the screen in bloody red text. Izuku Midoriya has gone missing. His mother is all alone. What will happen to her if he doesn't come home? Graduate Izuku. Or else. The video faded to black static. Izuku ripped the headphones off and threw the tablet to the floor. The glass screen cracked. He couldn't breathe. His chest felt like it was wrapped in iron bands. The analytical engine in his brain misfired, stalling out completely, overwhelmed by a flood of pure, agonizing panic. Mom. Mom, they have her. They're going to hurt her. I have to get out. I have to save her. I have to. He looked up. Around the room, the scene was one of absolute devastation. Uraraka was sobbing openly, her hands covering her face, hyperventilating. Ida was staring at his blank screen, his face drained of all color, his hands trembling so violently he couldn't hold the tablet. Jiro had curled into a fetal position in her chair. Even Bakugo looked utterly shell-shocked. The explosive boy was staring at his screen, his teeth gritted so hard his jaw looked like it might snap, a vein pulsing dangerously in his temple. Monomite had found the crack in their armor. He hadn't just introduced a motive, he had introduced a psychological bioweapon. They have my parents, Uraraka choked out, falling to her knees. Their construction business, it's ruined. They're on the street. They're starving. My brother, Ida whispered, his voice entirely devoid of its usual booming confidence. Tensei, he's been attacked. He's bleeding. Lies, Bakugo suddenly roared, leaping out of his chair and smashing his tablet against the wall. The plastic shattered into dozens of pieces. It's a trick. It's deepfake garbage. That bear is just trying to mess with our heads. Don't look at it. Don't believe it. It's true, Todoroki said quietly. He was still staring at his screen. His expression was impossible to read, a mask of frozen ice, but the temperature in the room literally dropped. The timestamp, the specific details. This isn't fabricated. This is real. Izuku forced himself to stand. His legs felt like jelly. He dug his nails into his palms, using the physical pain to ground his spiraling mind. Analyze the situation. The mastermind has presented an impossible choice. Stay here and let your loved ones suffer, or kill a friend to save them. Listen to me. Izuku shouted, his voice cracking slightly. Bakugo is right. It's manipulation. Even if it's real, the mastermind wants us to panic. If we kill each other, we give them exactly what they want. If we work together, we can find a way to break out and save everyone. How? Mineta shrieked, tearing at his purple hair. The windows are steel. The doors are locked. There's guns in the ceiling. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. The fragile peace was gone. The A/V room erupted into chaos, everyone shouting, crying, or fleeing the room entirely. Bakugo shoved past Izuku, grabbing Kirishima by the collar and dragging him out. Todoroki walked out silently, his eyes fixed on the floor. Izuku stood in the center of the room, surrounded by cracked tablets and weeping classmates. He pulled out his notebook, but his hand was shaking too hard to write. Variable shift complete. The ecosystem has been poisoned. Estimated time until critical failure, unknown. But it will be soon. Day 3 was a waking nightmare. The buddy system completely dissolved. Nobody trusted anyone. The fear of being murdered was entirely eclipsed by the agonizing, burning desire to escape and save their loved ones. Everyone looked at each other not as classmates, but as obstacles. Izuku spent the day frantically trying to mediate. He found Uraraka sitting alone in the botanical garden, a massive, indoor greenhouse on the first floor filled with exotic plants, gardening tools, and an oppressive, humid heat. Uraraka? Izuku asked gently, stepping through the glass doors. She jumped, spinning around, her hand instinctively reaching for a heavy pair of pruning shears on the nearby table. When she saw it was Izuku, she dropped her hand, looking ashamed. Sorry, she whispered, her eyes red and puffy. I heard footsteps. It's okay, Izuku said, maintaining a safe distance. He sat on a wooden bench, patting the spot next to him. After a moment's hesitation, she joined him. Deku, what was in your video? She asked softly. My mom, Izuku said, the words tasting like ash. She's being held hostage. Uraraka choked back a sob. It's my parents. They've lost everything. The debt collectors, they looked so violent. I became an ultimate to make money for them. To give them an easy life. If I'm stuck here, they're going to die. Izuku looked at her hands. They were trembling. She is capable of murder, his analytical mind whispered coldly. She has the physical conditioning of an astronaut, the motivation of familial preservation, and she is currently experiencing extreme psychological distress. She is a high-risk variable. He violently shoved the thought away. She's my friend. We will get out, Uraraka. Without killing, Izuku promised, though the words felt hollow. As they left the greenhouse, they passed Yuga Oyama. The ultimate sommelier was pacing nervously near the entrance. He looked terrible. His usually sparkling blonde hair was limp and greasy with sweat. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, his hands twitching. Aoyama? Are you all right? Izuku asked. Aoyama jumped nearly a foot in the air. Ah. Mon Dieu. Midoriya. Yes, I am perfectly fine. Sparkling as always. I am merely admiring the flora. Yes. Leave me be. He practically sprinted away down the hallway. Izuku narrowed his eyes, jotting a quick note in his book. Aoyama why? Extreme paranoia. Excessive sweating. Evasive behavior. Suspect high level of vulnerability. That night, Izuku couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the security camera, analyzing the rhythmic blinking of its red light. He was waiting. Waiting for the scream. Waiting for the announcement. He didn't sleep a wink. Day 4. 7 a.m. Bing bong, bing bong. Good morning, everyone. It is now 7 a.m. Time to wake up and face another beautiful day of communal living. Let's give it our all today. Izuku dragged himself out of his room. He felt physically ill, a heavy stone of dread sitting in his stomach. He made his way to the cafeteria. The room was nearly empty. Only Ida, Momo, and Tsuyu were there. They all looked exhausted, hollowed out by the psychological warfare. Good morning, Midoriya, Ida said softly, lacking any of his usual volume. It seems, attendance is sparse today. People are hiding in their rooms, Momo said, staring at a cup of black coffee. Can you blame them? 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Suddenly, the cafeteria doors burst open. Uraraka stood there, panting heavily, her eyes wide with terror. Midoriya, she gasped, pointing down the hallway. Mineta. He's not in his room. I went to check on him, and the door was wide open. It looks like there was a struggle. Adrenaline flooded Izuku's system, instantly clearing the brain fog of sleep deprivation. The analyst took over. Show me, Izuku commanded. They ran to the dorms. Mineta's room was a disaster. The bedsheets were torn off, books were scattered across the floor, and the desk chair was overturned. Izuku crouched down, examining the floor. No blood. No signs of blunt force trauma on the walls. The struggle was brief. Mineta is small, easily overpowered. But where was he taken? We need to search the school, Izuku said, standing up, his voice clinical. Ida, take the upper east wing. Momo, check the classrooms. Uraraka and Azuri, with me. We're checking the first floor facilities. They moved quickly, checking the A/V room, the gym, the bathrooms. Empty. Then, Izuku remembered the botanical garden. He sprinted down the hall, pushing open the heavy glass doors of the greenhouse. The humid, earthy smell of soil and fertilizer washed over him, but beneath the smell of petunias and damp earth, there was a sharp, metallic tang. Copper. Blood. Izuku walked slowly down the central aisle, brushing past the hanging ferns and massive tropical leaves. Near the back, by the fertilizer storage shed, he found him. Minoru Mineta, the ultimate botanist, was lying flat on his back in the dirt. His purple hair was matted and dark. A heavy, iron spade lay near his head, the edge of the shovel coated in a sickening layer of crimson and gray matter. Mineta's eyes were wide open, staring sightlessly at the glass ceiling of the greenhouse. But worse than the head wound was his skin. It was pallid, almost blue, and his lips were stained a dark, frothy purple. Izuku stood frozen. The notebook slipped from his fingers, hitting the dirt with a soft thud. All his logic, all his cold analysis, evaporated in the face of the visceral, horrific reality of a murdered classmate. The smell. The sight of the shattered skull. The absolute stillness of a body that used to be a living, breathing, terrified boy. Izuku dropped to his knees, clapping a hand over his mouth as his stomach violently rebelled. He dry-heaved, tears pricking his eyes. A high-pitched, electronic chime suddenly echoed from the monitors mounted in the greenhouse corners. Bing bong, bing bong. A body has been discovered. After a certain amount of free time, which you may use for your investigation, a class trial will commence. The announcement was so cheerful. So unbelievably, sociopathically cheerful. Footsteps pounded behind him. Uraraka and Azuri rushed around the corner. Uraraka let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed, burying her face in her hands. Azuri just stared, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. Within minutes, the rest of the students arrived, drawn by the announcement. Bakugo shoved his way to the front, stopping dead when he saw the body. His crimson eyes widened, and for a second, the aggressive facade slipped, revealing genuine horror. Ida turned away, reciting a quiet prayer. Jiro threw up into a nearby planter. Well, well, well! Monomite popped up from behind a large fern, holding a stack of manila folders. We have our first graduate in training. Oh, the despair is simply delicious. I can taste it, you bastard, Katsuki snarled, stepping forward, his hands sparking. Ah! Rules! Monomite warned, waving a finger. Now then, it's time for the investigation phase. Here is the Monomite file. It contains all the medical data regarding the victim's death that would be obvious to a trained coroner. Read it, weep, investigate, and I'll see you all at the class trial. He tossed the folders into the air and vanished. Izuku watched one of the folders land near Mineta's outstretched hand. He took a shaky breath. He looked at Uraraka, who was weeping uncontrollably. He looked at Bakugo, who was staring at the body with a mixture of rage and terror. They're going to panic, Izuku realized. If they panic in the trial, we vote wrong. If we vote wrong, everyone in this room dies except the killer. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. He imagined a heavy steel door inside his mind. On one side was Izuku Midoriya, the terrified teenager who had just seen his classmates' brains beaten out. On the other side was the ultimate analyst. He slammed the door shut on the teenager. He locked it. When Izuku opened his eyes, they were cold. The emerald green was hard as glass. He reached down, picked up his notebook, brushed the dirt off the cover, and picked up the Monomite file. Everyone, listen, Izuku said. His voice cut through the weeping and the murmurs like a scalpel. They all turned to him. The investigation begins now, Izuku stated, flipping open the file. We have limited time. We need to secure the crime scene, establish alibis, and gather physical evidence. If we fail, we all die, so cry later. Right now we work. He didn't wait for a response. He began reading the file aloud, his brain instantly processing the data. Victim, Minoru Mineta. Time of death, approximately 2 a.m. Cause of death, a combination of lethal poisoning and blunt force trauma to the cranium. Poisoning, Todoroki noted, stepping up beside Izuku. That explains the discoloration on his lips. So the killer poisoned him, then hit him with the shovel? Or vice versa, Momo said, forcing herself to look at the body. But where did they get poison? Izuku's eyes darted around the greenhouse. Mineta was the ultimate botanist. He had access to herbicides and pesticides. But look at his face. The foaming at the mouth, the cyanosis. That's a chemical asphyxiant. Like cyanide or a heavy concentrated alkaline. The chemistry lab on the second floor. I'll go check the lab, Ida volunteered, grateful for a task that took him away from the body. I will verify if any chemicals are missing. Good, Izuku said, his pen flying across his notebook. Clue 1, cause of death twofold. Suggests overkill, or a failure of the primary method. If the killer poisoned him, why use the shovel? Did the poison take too long? Did Mineta try to scream? Izuku stepped closer to the body, carefully avoiding the pool of blood. He crouched down, examining the dirt around Mineta. The greenhouse floor was composed of soft, damp potting soil. There were footprints everywhere. Look at the tracks, Izuku pointed. There's a struggle here. Deep indentations. The killer tackled him, or Mineta fell. Izuku leaned in closer to Mineta's shoes. They were heavily caked in mud. Wait, Izuku muttered. He looked at the bottom of Mineta's shoes. The tread pattern was a standard zigzag, but the footprints leading away from the body, toward the back exit of the greenhouse, were different. They were smooth, with a distinct circular heel imprint. Dress shoes. Izuku stood up and looked at the group. Almost everyone was wearing the standard school loafers or sneakers, except one person. Izuku's eyes found Yuga Aoyama. The blonde boy was standing near the back of the group, literally trembling. He was wearing custom, pointed-toe dress shoes with a small heel. Izuku didn't say anything. He just logged it. Clue 2, shoeprint mismatch. Circular heel. Suspect Oyama. Midoriya. Ida's voice crackled over the intercom system. The students had discovered they could use the classroom PA phones to communicate. I am in the chemistry lab. A cabinet has been forced open. A vial of potassium cyanide is missing. Understood, Izuku replied into a nearby wall unit. Don't touch the glass, check for fingerprints. Izuku returned to the body. He looked at the shovel. The handle was wrapped in a thick, clear plastic, part of a fertilizer bag, likely used to prevent fingerprints. The killer was sloppy, but panicked. As Izuku examined the area around the victim's head, a glint of light caught his eye. Buried slightly in the dirt, near the handle of the shovel, was a small, shattered piece of glass. Izuku used his pen to carefully dig it out. It wasn't a piece of greenhouse glass. It had an ornate gold-plated rim. It was a shard from a pocket mirror. Izuku stared at the shard. The pieces clicked into place in his mind with terrifying, absolute clarity. Aoyama is incredibly vain. He constantly carries a gold-plated pocket mirror. He was sweating profusely and acting evasive yesterday. He wears the shoes that match the footprints. The motive. Aoyama's secret. Izuku closed his eyes. The logic was flawless. The narrative constructed itself in his brain. Aoyama's motive video threatened to reveal his secret. He bought his way into Hope's Peak. He has no talent. He panicked. He stole the cyanide. He tried to kill Mineta in his room, but Mineta ran to his sanctuary, the greenhouse. Aoyama chased him. Forced the poison down his throat. But Mineta fought back, breaking Aoyama's mirror. In a panic to quiet him, Aoyama grabbed the nearest heavy object, the shovel, and struck him. Izuku felt sick. He had solved it. In less than 20 minutes, the ultimate analyst had unraveled the murder of his classmate. But knowing the truth and proving it in a trial where everyone's lives were on the line were two different things. He had to lead the others to the conclusion without making Aoyama panic and confess aggressively, which could derail the trial's logic. Suddenly, a loud, grinding mechanical noise shook the building. In the center of the first-floor hallway, directly outside the greenhouse, the floor was splitting apart. A massive, circular elevator platform rose from the depths, the metal grating clanking loudly. The monitors chimed again. "Time's up, kiddos," Monomite announced. "Please make your way to the elevator. It will take you down to the trial grounds. It's time for the first ever Hope's Peak Academy class trial." The students gathered around the elevator. No one wanted to step on. It looked like a descent into hell. "We have to go," Todoroki said quietly, stepping onto the metal grate. One by one, they filed on. Bakugo, Uraraka, Momo, Aoyama, who looked like he was about to faint. Izuku stepped on last. The heavy metal gates slammed shut, sealing them in. With a stomach-dropping lurch, the elevator began to descend deep into the earth. The only sound was the grinding of the gears and the terrified breathing of 14 surviving students. Izuku stood at the front, his hands tightly gripping the iron bars of the gate. He clutched his notebook to his chest. He had the answers. He held a classmate's life in his hands. The ultimate analyst closed his eyes and prepared to go to war for the truth. The descent into the earth was agonizingly slow. The heavy, circular iron elevator groaned and shrieked as it carried the 15 remaining students of Class 1A down into the darkness. There were no lights in the shaft, only the dim, sickly emergency bulb caged in the ceiling of the elevator car. It cast long, dancing shadows across the faces of the teenagers, highlighting the sheer terror etched into every feature. No one spoke. The silence was heavier than the metal grating beneath their feet. The only sound was the rhythmic, metallic clack-clack-clack of the gears and the ragged, shallow breathing of people who knew they were descending toward a life-or-death judgment. Izuku Midoriya stood at the very front of the platform, his hands gripping the iron lattice gate so tightly his knuckles were bone-white. He stared straight ahead into the blackness of the shaft. He wasn't looking at the dark, he was looking inward. His mind was a hurricane, but a highly organized one. He was sorting data, cross-referencing times, cataloging physical evidence, and assigning probability matrices to every single person in the elevator. The teenager who had wanted to cry over Minata's shattered body had been locked away in a soundproof vault at the back of his consciousness. Only the ultimate analyst remained. He needed absolute, zero-degree objectivity. If he let his emotions bleed into his logic, he would fail. And if he failed, 14 people would be executed. Behind him, someone let out a choked sob. It sounded like Uraraka. Izuku didn't turn around. He couldn't afford to look at her tears right now. With a final, bone-jarring thud, the elevator hit the bottom of the shaft. A pair of massive, ornately carved oak doors slowly swung outward, revealing a blindingly bright room. Izuku stepped off the elevator first, his eyes narrowing as they adjusted to the garish light. The trial room was a grotesque parody of a courtroom. It was circular, the walls painted in a dizzying checkerboard pattern of crimson and black. In the center of the room, arranged in a perfect circle, were 16 wooden podiums. Behind one of the podiums, a large, black and white portrait of Minoru Mineta hung, an ugly pink X painted over his face in what looked disturbingly like blood. It was a visceral, mocking reminder of what they had lost. At the far end of the room, elevated high above the student podiums, was a massive, velvet-lined throne. Sitting on it, swinging its stubby mechanical legs, was Monomite. "Welcome, welcome, welcome!" The robotic bear cheered, its synthesized voice booming from hidden speakers. "Please find the podium with your name on it. Don't be shy, step right up to the gallows, the stands." Izuku walked to his podium. It was situated between Uraraka and Bakugo. He placed his notebook squarely on the polished wood surface, opening it to the pages of his investigation. He clicked his pen. Once everyone had reluctantly taken their places, a heavy, mechanical hum filled the air. A circular barrier of reinforced glass rose from the floor, enclosing the circle of podiums, locking them in. "Now then!" Monomite clapped his paws together. "Let's review the rules of the class trial. You will all debate who amongst you committed the heinous murder of Minoru Mineta. If you reach the correct conclusion, and vote for the actual killer, the blackened will be punished. But if you pick the wrong person, the blackened gets to graduate, and all the rest of you will be punished. By punished, of course, I mean executed. Pupupa. The word executed echoed around the circular room. We understand the stakes, Shoto Todoroki said, his voice dropping the temperature in the room by several degrees. Let's just get this over with. Such enthusiasm. Monomite giggled. Then, without further ado, let the first-class trial of Hope's Peak Academy begin. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The silence was paralyzing. Where were they supposed to start? How did one begin accusing their friends of murder? Well? Hitoshi Shinso drawled, leaning his elbows on his podium, his tired eyes scanning the room. Are we going to stand here in silence until we starve, or are we going to state the obvious? The obvious being what? Momo Yayorozu asked, her hands nervously gripping the edges of her stand. Shinso pointed a lazy finger directly across the circle. The obvious being that we have a literal psychopath in our ranks who promised to blow us all through a wall just yesterday. Katsuki Bakugo's head snapped up, his crimson eyes blazing with instant, volatile fury. What the hell did you just say to me, you brainwashing freak? I'm just pointing out the facts, Shinso shrugged. You separated from the group. You refuse to participate in the buddy system. You have a violent temper, you constantly talk about killing people, and Mineta's head was bashed in with a shovel. Sounds like a crime of rage to me. Shinso has a point, Denki Kaminari stammered, shrinking back slightly as Bakugo glared at him. I mean, Bakugo, you were totally unhinged yesterday after the motive videos. You smashed your tablet. Maybe you snapped. You damn extras. Bakugo roared, slamming his fists onto his podium. I didn't kill that little purple grape. If I wanted to kill someone, I wouldn't use a damn shovel. I'd blow their head clean off so there was nothing left. That is hardly a reassuring defense, Bakugo. Tenya Ida shouted, chopping his arm defensively. Your aggressive disposition makes you the most logical suspect for a blunt force trauma murder. Hey, back off him! Eijiro Kurishima yelled, slamming his hands down. Bakugo's a jerk, yeah, but he's not a coward. He wouldn't sneak around in the middle of the night to kill Mineta. It's not manly. It doesn't fit his style. The room erupted into absolute chaos. Jiro began yelling at Kaminari. Ida was shouting over Bakugo. Uraraka was covering her ears, trembling. Izuku stood perfectly still. To him, the room had suddenly shifted. His brain slipped into an overdrive state. The adrenaline flooding his system mixed with his hyperanalytical processing. The physical world seemed to slow down. The colors of the room desaturated, turning into muted shades of gray, while the voices of his classmates echoed as if underwater. Non-stop debate. The term materialized in his mind. As they yelled, Izuku didn't just hear their words, he saw them. The statements physically manifested in his mind's eye as floating strings of text, swirling around the center of the trial room. Shinso, he has a violent temper. Kaminari, you snapped after the motive videos. Ida, the most logical suspect for a blunt force trauma murder. Most of the text was white, noise, opinions, conjecture. But as Izuku analyzed the flow of logic, certain phrases began to glow a sickly, vulnerable yellow. Weak points. Flaws in the deduction. Ida's statement glowed yellow. The most logical suspect for a blunt force trauma murder. Izuku looked down at his notebook. He recalled the specific detail of the shovel. The handle wrapped in plastic. Analytical bullet loaded. Condition of the murder weapon. Izuku took a deep breath, raised his hand, and pointed directly at Ida's glowing statement. No, that's wrong! Izuku's voice cut through the cacophony like a gunshot. It was so loud, so commanded with absolute authority, that everyone in the room instantly went silent, turning to stare at him. The floating text shattered into pieces in Izuku's mind as his logic destroyed Ida's argument. The world returned to normal speed and color. Midoriya? Ida blinked, surprised. What is wrong about my assessment? Bakugo is the most physically aggressive among us. Physical aggression doesn't match the profile of the crime scene, Izuku said clinically, his eyes locked onto Ida. If Bakugo killed Mineta in a blind rage, he would have just grabbed the shovel and hit him, but he didn't. The killer premeditated the strike. How do you know that? Momo asked, her brow furrowing. The handle of the shovel, Izuku explained, tapping his pen on his notes. It was wrapped in a thick, clear plastic cut from a fertilizer bag. The killer took the time to wrap the handle to prevent leaving fingerprints before they struck. A murmur of realization swept through the room. Bakugo doesn't care about fingerprints, Izuku continued, glancing at his childhood friend. His hands secrete a nitroglycerin-like substance. If he gripped a plastic bag that tightly, and swung a heavy iron shovel, the friction and his sweat would have caused a localized explosion, melting the plastic to his hands or destroying the handle entirely. The shovel handle was perfectly intact. Therefore, Bakugo cannot be the killer. Bakugo stared at Izuku, his expression a complicated mix of shock and grudging respect, before he scoffed and looked away. I didn't need you to defend me, Deku. I'm not defending you, Izuku replied coldly, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. I am defending the truth. If we vote for you based on prejudice, we all die. The sheer pragmatism in Izuku's voice sent a chill down Uraraka's spine. This wasn't the stuttering, anxious boy she had met at the gates. This was a machine built for deduction. Okay, so it wasn't Sparky, Shinso said, leaning back. But that doesn't change the fact that someone bashed Minata's head in. If it was premeditated, they had to have planned to meet him in the greenhouse. Not necessarily, Todoroki interjected, his mismatched eyes scanning the room. Midoriya, you noted in your initial sweep that there was a secondary cause of death. The monomite file confirmed it. Izuku nodded. Yes. The blunt force trauma was severe, but it wasn't the only cause. Mineta's lips were cyanotic, and there was a dark froth at his mouth. He was poisoned. Poisoned? Kaminari yelped. With what? When we investigated, I sent Ida to the chemistry lab, Izuku said, gesturing to the tall boy. Ida report? Ida adjusted his glasses, standing up perfectly straight. Yes. Upon inspection of the second-floor chemistry lab, I found that the reinforced lock on the hazardous materials cabinet had been forced open with a crowbar. A single vial was missing, potassium cyanide. Several people gasped. Suya put a finger to her chin. Ribbit. Cyanide acts incredibly fast. It prevents cells from using oxygen. If someone forced cyanide down his throat, he would have been dead in minutes. Exactly, Izuku said. The world began to slow down again. The non-stop debate was restarting. Jiro, so the killer poisoned him in his sleep? Momo, then dragged the body to the greenhouse? Tokoemi, a dark ritual requires a specific venue. The greenhouse was chosen for a reason. Ajri, maybe he was poisoned in the greenhouse, Ribbit. Izuku's eyes darted across the floating yellow statements. He needed to establish the timeline and the location of the struggle. Analytical bullet loaded, the state of Mineta's room. He aimed at Momo's statement about dragging the body. I'll cut through your words. Izuku shouted. The text shattered. Mineta wasn't poisoned in his sleep, and he wasn't dragged to the greenhouse, Izuku stated flatly. Uraraka discovered his dorm room this morning. Uraraka, what did it look like? Uraraka jumped slightly at being addressed, but she swallowed her fear and spoke up. It was a mess. The blankets were torn off, books were on the floor. It looked like a fight happened, but there was no blood in the dorm room, Izuku pointed out. And dragging a dead weight from the dorms, all the way down the hall, to the first floor, and into the greenhouse would leave physical evidence. Scuff marks on the floor, fibers from his clothes, or mud tracked out of the greenhouse. There was none of that. So what happened? Kirishima asked, scratching his head. If he wasn't killed in his room, why was it messed up? Because he ran, Izuku said. He closed his eyes, visualizing the scene, building the diorama of death in his mind. The killer entered Mineta's room. Mineta woke up. A struggle ensued. That's why the room is a mess. Mineta managed to slip past the killer and ran. He fled to the one place in the school where he felt he had an advantage. The botanical garden, his talent's domain. That makes sense, Todoroki nodded slowly. He ran to the greenhouse to find a weapon, or perhaps to hide in the dense foliage. But the killer chased him, and when the killer caught him in the greenhouse, they forced the poison into his mouth, Momo deduced, her eyes widening in horror. But why the shovel? Because Mineta didn't go down immediately, Izuku explained, his voice grim. Cyanide is fast, but it's not instantaneous. It burns. It causes convulsions. Mineta fought back. He thrashed. The killer panicked, realizing Mineta might scream and wake someone up. So, they grabbed the nearest heavy object, wrapped the handle in a plastic bag to hide their prints, and hit him to silence him. The gruesome reality of the murder hung heavy in the air. The image of the small, terrified boy fighting for his life in the dirt was almost too much to bear. Aoyama, standing 3 podiums away from Izuku, let out a small, high-pitched whimper, wiping a sheen of heavy sweat from his forehead. "All right, so we have a chase, a poisoning, and a bludgeoning," Shinso said, tapping his fingers on the wood. "But that still doesn't tell us who did it. Anyone could break into the chem lab. Anyone could swing a shovel." "True," Izuku said, opening his eyes. They were glowing with an intense, unyielding light. But the killer left a physical trail in the greenhouse that points directly to them. The monitors above Monomite's throne flared to life, displaying a high-resolution photograph Izuku had taken with his e-handbook during the investigation. It was a picture of the dirt floor next to Mineta's body. "As you can see, the struggle left deep footprints in the potting soil," Izuku narrated, stepping away from his podium slightly to point at the screen. "These zigzag treads belong to Mineta's sneakers, but look at the footprints overlapping them. The ones belonging to the killer." The room studied the screen. "They're smooth," Jiro observed, her eyes narrowing. "There's no tread pattern on the sole. And look at the heel," Izuku commanded. "It's a distinct, deep circular imprint. It's small, maybe 1.5 inches in diameter." "So?" Kaminari shrugged. "It's a shoe. Most of us are wearing the standard school loafers. They have flat soles and small heels." The world slowed down for the 3rd time. The final debate. The last push to the truth. Kaminari: "Most of us are wearing the standard school loafers." Kirishima: "Yeah, my shoes look kinda like that." Momo: "Could it be a girl's shoe? The heel is quite pronounced." Aoyama: "It could be anyone's. Mud distorts everything." Izuku's eyes locked onto Aoyama's desperate, floating yellow text. "Analytical bullet loaded, dress shoe inspection." "No, that's wrong!" Izuku yelled, pointing directly at the ultimate sommelier. Aoyama physically recoiled, gasping loudly as all eyes suddenly turned to him. "The school loafers have a wide, rectangular heel," Kaminari, Izuku stated, not breaking eye contact with Aoyama. "The impression in the mud is perfectly circular. It's not a sneaker, and it's not a standard loafer. It's a custom, pointed-toe dress shoe with a tapered circular heel." Izuku took a breath, letting the silence build before delivering the killing blow. "Yuga Aoyama, you are the only person in this room wearing those exact shoes." The trial room erupted. "Aoyama?" Uraraka gasped, stepping away from her podium in shock. "No way," Kirishima muttered. "The sparkling guy? Midoriya, are you certain?" Ida demanded, leaning forward intensely. Aoyama was shaking violently. His usually pristine, sparkling posture had completely collapsed. He gripped his podium with white-knuckled fingers, his chest heaving. "And non! This is absurd. Mon-ami, you are mistaken. I was in my room the entire night. Sleeping beautifully. Were you?" Izuku challenged, his voice relentless. "If you were in your room all night, why were you pacing outside the greenhouse yesterday, sweating profusely and acting paranoid when Uraraka and I approached you?" I was simply admiring the flowers." Aoyama shrieked, his voice pitching up an octave. "It is a crime to appreciate beauty now?" "You were checking the scene of the crime," Izuku corrected coldly. "You wanted to see if anyone had found the body yet. You were terrified." "Lies! Slander!" Aoyama yelled, tears pricking his eyes. "You have only mud. Mud is inexact. Anyone could have worn similar shoes. You have no concrete proof that it was me." Aoyama was fighting for his life. The sheer desperation in his voice made Izuku's stomach churn. Every instinct in Izuku's body screamed at him to back down, to comfort the terrified boy. He was essentially acting as an executioner. If he pushed this final piece of evidence, Aoyama would die. "If I don't," the analyst reasoned, 14 people die. The needs of the many. Izuku reached into his blazer pocket. He pulled out a small, clear plastic evidence bag he had procured from the chem lab. Inside the bag was a single, ornate shard of gold-plated glass. During the struggle, Izuku said, his voice dropping to a somber, quiet tone that echoed clearly in the silent room, Mineta fought back. In the dirt, right next to where his head was bludgeoned, I found this. He held up the bag. It's a shard of glass. But not from the greenhouse windows. It has a gold-plated rim. It's a piece of a custom pocket mirror. Aoyama let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. You are incredibly vain, Aoyama, Izuku said softly. You carry a gold-plated pocket mirror with you everywhere. You check it constantly. But you haven't checked it once today. I suspect that if I asked Monomite to search your pockets right now, we would find a broken mirror, missing this exact piece. The fight completely drained out of Aoyama. His knees buckled, and he collapsed behind his podium, sobbing openly. I didn't want to. Aoyama wailed, his voice echoing off the checkerboard walls. I didn't mean to. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The room was absolutely silent, save for Aoyama's agonizing sobs. Izuku slowly lowered the evidence bag. The analytical engine in his brain shut down, leaving only the hollow, aching reality of what he had just done. He had won. He had found the truth. It tasted like poison. Aoyama, Uraraka whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Why? Why did you do it? Aoyama slowly pulled himself up using the podium. His face was a mess of tears and snot, his blonde hair plastered to his forehead. He looked pathetic. He looked like a frightened child. The video, Aoyama choked out, looking at the floor. The motive video. Did you see yours? We all saw our videos, Aoyama, Todoroki said coldly. We didn't resort to murder. You don't understand. Aoyama screamed, looking up with wild, desperate eyes. You are all so brilliant. So talented. You belong here. I am a fraud. A shocked murmur went through the group. The ultimate sommelier? Aoyama laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. It is a joke. A lie. My parents are wealthy wine merchants. They bought my way into Hope's Peak. They bribed the admissions board. I have no talent. I have no quirk of genius. I am just average. Aoyama gripped his chest, over his heart. The video, the mastermind knew. They showed my parents being arrested by the authorities for fraud and bribery. They said that if I didn't graduate, my secret would be broadcast to the entire world. My family would be ruined. I would be a laughingstock. The ultimate fraud. Izuku stared at him. The motive. It wasn't malice. It was profound, pathetic insecurity. The mastermind had exploited Aoyama's deepest shame. So you decided to kill Mineta? Katsuki growled, his fists clenched tight. No. I swear it. Aoyama cried. I did not plan to kill him. I stole the cyanide from the lab, yes. I thought, maybe I could use it on someone strong. But I was too afraid. I decided I would break into the headmaster's office. I would find the server and delete the videos. Aoyama wiped his eyes, his hands shaking violently. I was sneaking through the dorms. But Mineta, he was awake. He was terrified after the videos, too. He was guarding his door. He saw me with the crowbar and the poison. He panicked. He thought I was coming to kill him. The pieces finally clicked perfectly together in Izuku's mind, completing the tragic puzzle. He ran to the greenhouse to hide. Izuku finished for him softly. And you chased him, because if he told everyone you were sneaking around with poison, I would have been the prime suspect, Aoyama sobbed. I just wanted to quiet him down. I tackled him in the greenhouse. I put my hand over his mouth. But he was thrashing. He bit me. He broke my mirror. In the panic, the vial of cyanide, it broke. It spilled into his mouth. Aoyama looked at his own hands as if they belonged to a monster. He started choking. Frothing. The sounds he was making, mon Dieu, the sounds. I panicked. I grabbed the shovel and I hit him, just to make him stop suffering. To make it quiet. Silence reclaimed the trial room. It was a pathetic, accidental, panic-driven murder, born of insecurity and fear. It wasn't the work of a criminal mastermind. It was the work of a terrified teenager. And that, Izuku realized with a sickening lurch of his stomach, was exactly what Monomite wanted. The mastermind didn't want evil villains. They wanted to show that even good, ordinary people could be pushed to horrific acts under the right pressure. Well, 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 Monomite's voice shattered the heavy atmosphere. The bear was practically vibrating with glee on his throne. What a tragic, sparkly little tale. A tale of vanity, panic, and blunt force trauma. Oh, I am positively moved to tears. The bear wiped a fake tear from its metallic eye. Shut up, Izuku hissed, glaring up at the throne with pure, unadulterated hatred. Now, Midoriya. Don't be a sore winner. Monomite cheered. It's time for the moment of truth. Please use the touchscreens on your podiums to cast your votes. Who will it be? Will you choose the sparkling sommelier, or will you make a terrible mistake? A small screen lit up on Izuku's podium, displaying the faces of all 15 remaining students. Izuku's hand hovered over Aoyama's face. His finger was trembling so hard he could barely aim. If I press this, I am killing him, Izuku thought. My logic is the weapon. I am the executioner. He looked across the circle. Aoyama wasn't even looking at his screen. He was just weeping into his hands. Uraraka pressed her screen while sobbing. Ida closed his eyes and pushed his button. Izuku swallowed the bile rising in his throat and tapped Aoyama's face. The screens vanished. A massive slot machine wheel appeared on the monitors above Monomite's throne. The faces of the students spun rapidly, before slowing down and landing on 3 identical images of Yuga Aoyama. Confetti exploded from the ceiling. A jaunty, carnival-style tune began to play over the speakers. Ding ding ding! Monomite roared, standing up on his throne. We have a winner! Or, well, a loser. The blackened who killed Minoru Mineta is none other than Yuga Aoyama, the ultimate sommelier. Please, Aoyama whispered, falling to his knees behind his podium. Please, I don't want to die. Midoriya, please, you have to save me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Izuku took a step forward, his hand reaching out instinctively. Monomite, wait, I have prepared a very special punishment for our fraudulent friend. Monomite interrupted, ignoring Izuku entirely. The bear pulled out a small wooden gavel and slammed it down onto a big red button on his throne. Let's give it everything we've got. It's punishment time. The carnival music warped into a dark, heavy industrial beat. Suddenly, a metal collar clamped around Aoyama's neck from behind. Attached to the collar was a thick steel chain. Aoyama didn't even have time to scream before the chain retracted with violent speed, yanking him backward off his feet. He was dragged across the floor of the trial room and pulled through a dark doorway that materialized in the wall. Aoyama! Uraraka screamed. A massive blast shield lowered over the doorway, but a large monitor above it flickered to life, forcing the remaining students to watch. The title card on the screen read, A Vintage Pressing Execution of the Ultimate Sommelier. The video feed showed Aoyama dropped into a massive, wooden vat, like the kind used for traditional grape stomping in vineyards. However, the vat was the size of a small swimming pool. Aoyama scrambled to his feet, crying, slipping on the slick, wooden floor of the vat. He tried to climb the sheer walls, but his fingernails just scraped helplessly against the wood. Then, the camera panned up. Suspended 30 feet above the vat was a massive, solid steel cylinder. The bottom of the cylinder was studded with iron spikes. Painted on the front of the cylinder was Monomite's smiling face. It was a hydraulic press. The music swelled to a horrific, chaotic crescendo. The hydraulic press released. It didn't fall instantly. It descended slowly, the gears grinding loudly, giving Aoyama agonizing seconds to realize what was happening. The blonde boy looked up at the descending steel. The vanity, the sparkling facade, the fear, it all washed away, leaving only pure, primal terror. He opened his mouth, and though the glass of the monitor muted the sound, Izuku could read his lips. Mom. Dad. I'm sorry. The press slammed down into the vat. Blood, bright, neon pink in the garish lighting of the execution video, splattered violently against the camera lens, obscuring the view. The machine whirred, and a spigot at the bottom of the vat opened. A stream of dark crimson liquid poured into a giant, cartoonish wine bottle labeled Chateau Despair. The monitor faded to black. The trial room was dead silent. The carnival music had stopped. Izuku stood frozen at his podium. He couldn't breathe. The image of the hydraulic press slamming down was seared into his retinas. The horrific squelch of the impact echoed in his ears. Someone was throwing up. It was Kaminari, retching onto the floor next to his podium. Uraraka had collapsed, held up only by Azui, who was staring blankly at the dark monitor. Even Bakugo looked physically ill, his aggressive posture completely gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted stare. They had just murdered a classmate. Legally, logically, systematically murdered him. Monomite sighed happily from his throne, rubbing his mechanical belly. That hits the spot. A vintage year for despair. You all did wonderfully. Your logic was impeccable, Midoriya. Izuku slowly turned his head to look at the bear. The cold, analytical machine in his brain, the one that had allowed him to piece together the murder, shattered. In its place, a blazing, white-hot inferno of fury ignited. It was a rage so pure, so absolute, that it felt like it was burning away his nerve endings. You! Izuku whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying intensity. What was that, my star pupil? Monomite tilted his head. Izuku didn't yell. He didn't scream. He looked at Monomite with eyes that were no longer human. They were the eyes of an apex predator locking onto its prey. You forced him, Izuku said, his voice cold and hard as diamond. You backed a terrified kid into a corner, and then you made us pull the trigger. I merely set the stage. Monomite laughed, though it sounded slightly nervous under Izuku's glare. They wrote the script. Izuku picked up his notebook from the podium. He didn't look at his notes. He looked at the blank pages near the back. I am going to find out who is controlling you, Izuku stated, pointing his pen directly at the bear. I am going to analyze every wire in your body. I am going to tear down every rule in this school. I will rip this entire game apart, and when I find the mastermind... Izuku gripped the notebook so hard the cardboard cover cracked. I am going to make you regret the day you ever gave me a blank page. Monomite stared back at him. For a split second, the red, jagged eye on the bear's left side seemed to dim, as if the person behind the screen was genuinely unnerved. Pupa. Monomite forced a laugh, waving a paw dismissively. Big words for a quirkless little nerd. We'll see how long that resolve lasts when the next motive drops. Class dismissed. The glass barrier lowered. The trial was over. The heavy oak doors of the elevator opened automatically, waiting to take the survivors back to the surface. They filed in like ghosts. Nobody spoke. The trauma of the last 3 hours had broken them all in different ways. They had lost 2 classmates today. One to fear, and one to logic. As the elevator began its slow ascent, Izuku Midoriya stood at the back of the car. He didn't look at the others. He looked down at his notebook. He flipped to a fresh page. He clicked his pen. He didn't write down evidence. He didn't write down behavioral analyses. In large, dark, deeply pressed letters, Izuku wrote a single vow. No more murders. I will end this. The ultimate analyst had solved the case. But the hero had just declared war.